Living on a farm has its perks. Nobody breathes down your neck about how tall your grass is or whether your mailbox matches some imaginary community aesthetic. Out here, there's only one rule: don't mess with a farmer. Simple. But apparently, the HOA didn't get the memo. It all started on a crisp Tuesday morning, the kind where the air is fresh, the coffee is hot, and for a brief moment, all seems right with the world. I had just poured my first cup of coffee, and Max, my loyal hound, was scratching at the door, eager to patrol his kingdom. The birds were singing, the sun was rising, and life was good. Then, I heard it, the unmistakable growl of a generator followed by the high-pitched whine of a power saw. Now, I don't have a lot of rules on this farm, but one of them is this: if you're going to make that much noise before 9 a.m., you better be me. Mug in hand, I stepped outside, trying to figure out who was disturbing my peace. As I reached the top of the hill, I saw them, 3 guys in neon vests swarming my bridge like termites on fresh lumber. One held a clipboard, barking orders like he had just been promoted to general of the "We Don't Know What We're Doing" brigade. The other 2 were busy dismantling the planks of my bridge. My bridge, the only way on and off my property. At first, I thought surely this was a mistake. No one could be dumb enough to just waltz onto private land and start tearing apart a man's livelihood. But as I got closer, I realized, oh no, they were absolutely that dumb. "Hey," I shouted, waving my arm. "What the hell are you doing to my bridge?" Clipboard guy looked up, and I swear, the smug grin on his face made me want to toss my coffee right at him. "Good morning, sir," he called out like he was greeting someone at the DMV. "We're here on behalf of the HOA, just addressing a safety concern." I stopped dead in my tracks. Oh, my land. My bridge. I'd lived here for over 10 years, and the nearest HOA was a good 5 miles away. "Let me get this straight," I said, stepping closer. "You're tearing down my bridge because the HOA told you to?" "That's correct," Clipboard guy replied, not even blinking. "This structure doesn't meet community standards. It's a liability." "A liability?" I let out a dry laugh. That's rich coming from the guy standing on my private property with a power saw. The 2 workers hesitated. I could see them exchanging nervous glances. "Good. Listen," I continued, my voice steady but loud enough to make them pause. "This is private land. You've got no business here. So, pack up your tools and leave before I call the sheriff." Clipboard guy gave me a pitying look, like I was some clueless child who didn't understand the importance of HOA bureaucracy. "Sir," he said, flipping through his papers, "the HOA has authority over this entire area. We're just doing our job." I felt my left eye twitch. Authority over this area? I gestured to the wide-open fields, the creek, the barn in the distance. "Buddy, you're about 5 miles off the HOA's map. So unless you've got a magic wand that rewrites property lines, you're trespassing." One of the workers, a big guy with arms like tree trunks, decided to chime in. "Look, man, we're just following orders. You got a problem, take it up with the HOA board." "Oh, don't worry," I said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'll take it up with them. But first, let me make something clear. If you don't stop what you're doing right now, you're going to have 2 problems." I pointed at the power saw still whining in his hands. "1, you're not going to have a saw anymore." Then, I let out a sharp whistle. Max came bounding down the hill, all 90 pounds of muscle and attitude, teeth bared, growling like he'd just found a raccoon in the hen house. The 2 workers froze, eyes darting between me and the dog. Clipboard guy, to his credit, held his ground, but I could see him sweating. "Is that a threat?" he asked, his voice an octave higher now. "No," I said, smiling. "That's a promise. Now pack up and go before Max decides he doesn't like trespassers." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, the big guy with the saw muttered, "Screw this," dropped his tools, and started backing away. His partner followed, and within seconds, they were packing up like their lives depended on it. Clipboard guy hesitated, looking like he wanted to argue, but when Max let out a deep, menacing bark, he thought better of it. "This isn't over," he said, pointing a finger at me as he climbed into his truck. Yeah, I waved him off. "Go tell your boss Cynthia Harper that she can either stay 5 miles away where she belongs, or she can come out here herself and explain why she thinks she runs my land." He didn't answer. The trucks rumbled to life and peeled down the dirt road, kicking up dust as they fled. I watched them go, then turned to Max, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy. He wagged his tail, still eyeing the retreating vehicles. I took a slow sip of my coffee, now lukewarm. Guess I have a meeting with the HOA. But first, I had a bridge to fix. Packing up their tools, the clipboard guy looked like he wanted to argue, but one sharp bark from Max changed his mind. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind half-dismantled planks and a mess of splinters. As their truck disappeared down the road, I stood by what was left of my bridge, Max at my side, surveying the damage. "Well, boy," I said, scratching his ears. "Looks like the HOA just made their first mistake." Max wagged his tail, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. If they thought they were getting away with this, they were sorely mistaken. The morning after the bridge fiasco, I was still steaming. Every time I looked out the window and saw that gaping hole where my bridge used to be, my blood pressure spiked. I'd been crossing that bridge for years. It had held up through storms, floods, and even one very questionable attempt to haul an overloaded trailer across it. But apparently, it didn't meet the HOA's sacred community standards. One thing was certain, this wasn't over. If Clipboard Guy and his crew thought they could waltz onto my property, dismantle my bridge, and walk away without consequences, they had another thing coming. So after finishing my coffee, priorities, obviously, I grabbed my truck keys, loaded Max into the passenger seat, and headed into town. First stop, the HOA office. If you've never had the misfortune of stepping into an HOA office, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a dentist's waiting room, but somehow more soul-sucking, beige walls, motivational posters about community harmony, and the faint, stale scent of coffee that had been sitting in the pot for days. The receptionist, a woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, glanced up as I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked, not even trying to sound polite. "Yeah," I said, plastering on my best fake smile. "I'm here to see whoever's in charge of tearing down bridges that don't belong to them." She blinked, clearly not expecting sarcasm this early in the day. "You mean the HOA president?" "That's right," I said. "Let me guess, Clipboard, God Complex?" She looked uncomfortable, but nodded. "You'll need an appointment." "Oh, I'll be sure to send a calendar invite right after I get my bridge back," I shot back. "But for now, I'll settle for 5 minutes." Before she could argue, the door behind her opened, and out walked the woman of the hour herself, Cynthia Harper, or as I like to call her, the Clipboard Queen. She was exactly what I expected, mid-50s, immaculately dressed, and armed with a clipboard practically glowing with self-importance. Her smile was the kind you'd see on a real estate agent, fake, calculated, and ready to convince you that buying a house next to a landfill was a great investment. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, absolutely," I said, stepping forward. "You can start by explaining why your little demolition crew tore down my bridge yesterday." Her smile didn't falter, but I caught the briefest flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Ah, you must be Mr. Reed. We sent you a notice last month regarding the bridge." "No, you didn't," I said flatly. "What you sent me was a glossy brochure full of HOA propaganda and a vague mention of community improvements. I'm not in your HOA, and my property isn't within your jurisdiction, so why exactly do you think you can touch my bridge?" Cynthia clasped her hands in front of her clipboard, radiating fake patience. "The HOA has a responsibility to maintain the safety and aesthetic standards of the community. Your bridge posed a liability." "A liability to who?" I interrupted. "The cows? The squirrels?" "Newsflash, lady, nobody crosses that bridge but me. And even if it was a problem, you still had no right to come onto my land without permission." Her smile tightened. "The HOA has the authority to address community concerns, Mr. Reed. If you disagree with our actions, you're welcome to file a formal complaint." "Oh, I'll do more than that," I said, my voice low. "I'll see you in court before I let you and your clipboard mafia get away with this." For the first time, her smile slipped, just a little. She wasn't used to people pushing back, and I could tell it was throwing her off. "Well," she said, recovering quickly, "if that's how you feel, then I suppose we'll let the legal system decide. But I should warn you, Mr. Reed, the HOA has substantial resources. A legal battle could be quite costly." I leaned in just a little, my voice steady. "Lady, I was in the military for 15 years. I've faced worse than some overgrown homeowners club with a superiority complex. If you think I'm just going to roll over and let you take my land, you've got another thing coming." She straightened, clearly recalculating, but I was done wasting my breath. I turned on my heel and walked out, Max trotting at my side. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Cynthia Harper had a very thorough legal team. Great, I said, turning to leave. I hope they're thorough enough to explain why you're trespassing on private property and filing fraudulent claims with the county. Should make for an interesting case. As I walked out the door, I could feel Cynthia's glare burning into the back of my head. Back at home, I started digging. If Cynthia wanted to play the legal game, I was more than happy to oblige. I pulled out every document I had, property deeds, tax records, county maps. Sure enough, my land was miles outside the HOA's official boundaries. Even better, I found a letter from the county explicitly denying the HOA's request to expand their jurisdiction into my area. They had tried to annex nearby properties a year ago, and the county had shut them down cold. Feeling pretty smug, I called up my buddy Henry Dawson, who worked at the county records office. He owed me a favor after I helped him repair his truck last spring. Within an hour, I had copies of the HOA's rejection letter, their bylaws, and even some juicy meeting minutes where Cynthia and her cronies discussed their plans to assert control over nearby landowners. Oh, it was game on. But I wasn't just fighting for myself. Turns out, I wasn't the only one targeted by Cynthia and her clipboard army. My neighbor, Ethan Walker, a local carpenter, told me the HOA had fined him for having an unapproved fence, never mind that it had been standing since the 1990s. Then there was Natalie Brooks, a freelance journalist running a small organic farm down the road. She had refused to pay some bogus access fee the HOA had slapped on her, and a week later, her irrigation pipes mysteriously got cut. By the time I talked to half a dozen neighbors, it was clear this wasn't just about my land. Cynthia and her HOA were on a power trip, steamrolling anyone who dared to stand in their way. So, we formed a plan. Natalie handled the media side. She had a friend at the local paper who was more than happy to hear about HOA corruption. Henry, who used to be in law enforcement, offered to help gather evidence. And me? Well, let's just say I was ready to play hardball. There's nothing quite as satisfying as turning the tables on someone who thinks they're untouchable. After my little chat with Cynthia, I made it my personal mission to expose every layer of her HOA empire. By the time our coalition of neighbors met again, I had a file thick enough to rival one of Cynthia's clipboards. But we still had work to do. If we were going to take this thing down, we needed to hit her where it hurt. Our first meeting took place at Henry's shop. The smell of fresh coffee and motor oil filled the air, which I appreciated since it balanced out the bitterness of the task at hand. Around the table sat Henry, Natalie, Ethan, and 3 other neighbors who had been burned by the HOA. Henry spread out a county map on the table. "All right," he said, stabbing a finger at an area highlighted in green. "This is the official HOA boundary." I leaned forward, tracing the lines with my finger. Sure enough, it stopped well short of my property, as well as Natalie's and Henry's. "This is all they're legally allowed to manage," Henry continued. "But here's where they've been issuing fines and sending out notices." He pointed to a larger area marked in red, which included all of our properties. "Let me guess," I said. "They didn't get permission for this expansion?" "Not even close," Henry said, pulling out a stack of documents. "The county denied their request last year, but it looks like they've been pretending it went through anyway." Natalie shook her head, frustration evident. "And nobody stopped them? The county doesn't care." "Oh, they'll care," I said, holding up the rejection letter I had gotten from my buddy at the records office. "Especially when we show them this. They've been filing complaints and issuing fines based on a jurisdiction they don't even have." As we dug deeper, the full scope of the HOA's antics became clear. Natalie shared messages from other residents who had been strong-armed into compliance. Ethan showed us pictures of unauthorized HOA contractors trespassing on his land to inspect his violations. Another neighbor revealed that the HOA had tried to place a lien on his home for unpaid dues he didn't even owe. By the time we were done, our case against Cynthia and her corrupt HOA was airtight. The next morning, Natalie's article exposing their fraudulent activities went live, and within hours, it was spreading like wildfire. Calls flooded into the county office. News crews showed up at HOA headquarters, shoving microphones in Cynthia's face. Then, the county finally acted. HOA officials were ordered to cease all enforcement activities outside their legal boundaries. Cynthia and Brandon Ellis, the HOA's treasurer, were investigated for financial misconduct. And just like that, the empire they had built on intimidation and lies began to crumble. A week later, we met up again at Henry's shop. The atmosphere was lighter this time, the weight of HOA oppression finally lifting. As we celebrated, Max, my loyal hunting dog, wagged his tail and trotted over, nosing at my hand. I scratched behind his ears and grinned. Well, folks, looks like the clipboard army finally met their match. How they tried to intimidate Olivia Carter into paying the so-called access fee, claiming it was for road maintenance. Funny thing is, she said, I maintain that road myself. Haven't seen a single HOA truck out there. Then there was Ethan Walker, a quiet carpenter in his early 40s who owned a small orchard just outside the neighborhood. He'd been fined for unauthorized fencing after putting up a deer-proof barrier. The fence doesn't even face their property, he said, shaking his head. But they claim it doesn't align with the aesthetic. And Henry Dawson, bless his heart, had an entire binder full of letters from the HOA over the years. Everything from the color of my garage to the height of my grass, he said, flipping through the pages. And none of it's enforceable. They're just hoping people don't know any better. By the time we were done, we had enough stories to fill a novel and enough evidence to make Cynthia Harper and her clipboard army squirm. The next step was getting the word out. Natalie Brooks, a freelance journalist in her mid-30s and an old friend of mine, agreed to run a feature story on the HOA's overreach, complete with interviews and photos of the damage they'd caused. Meanwhile, I took to social media. Now, I'm not usually the type to spend much time online, but even I could appreciate the power of a well-placed Facebook post. Within hours of sharing our story, my inbox was flooded with messages from other locals who had run-ins with the HOA. One message stood out, a former HOA board member who had quit after clashing with Cynthia. She runs the HOA like a dictatorship, the message read. Most of us just went along with it because we didn't want to deal with her wrath. But everything you're saying? It's all true and worse. Oh, I was all ears. The day the story hit the paper, I stayed up late scrolling through the comments. People were furious. Finally, someone was shining a light on the HOA's antics. I was just about to shut down my laptop when Max started growling. Not the kind of growl that meant he heard a rabbit, but the deep, menacing one that said someone was there who shouldn't be. Grabbing my flashlight and shotgun, because you don't live on a farm without being prepared, I stepped out onto the porch. Max was already at the edge of the driveway, hackles up, staring into the darkness. Who's there? I called, sweeping the flashlight beam across the yard. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a rustle in the bushes. All right, I said, raising the shotgun. You've got about 3 seconds to show yourself before this gets ugly. To my surprise, a man stepped out of the shadows, hands raised. He was middle-aged, balding, and wearing a rumpled suit that didn't quite fit him. Whoa, he said, his voice shaky. I'm not here to cause trouble. I heard about what you're doing, and I thought you'd want to know something. Who are you? I asked, lowering the shotgun slightly, but not entirely. My name's Brandon Ellis, he said. I used to be the HOA treasurer. Once I was sure Brandon wasn't a threat, and after Max gave him a thorough sniff down, I invited him inside. Over a cup of coffee, he told me everything. Cynthia's been running the HOA like her own little kingdom for years, he said. She pressures people into compliance, fudges numbers to make it look like the HOA is doing more than it is, and bullies anyone who steps out of line. He went on to explain how the HOA had been collecting fines from properties outside their jurisdiction and funneling the money into special projects that benefited only a select few board members. She's got the board wrapped around her finger, Brandon said. Most of them are too scared to stand up to her. But there's one thing she's terrified of. What's that? I asked. Bad press, he said. She's obsessed with the HOA's image. If the community turns on her, she's done for. That was music to my ears. I won't lie, Brandon's intel was a game changer. If Cynthia's one true weakness was her obsession with keeping up appearances, then I knew exactly where to hit her. It was time to take the fight public and make it as loud and messy as possible. The first step? Letting the whole community know just how deep the HOA's corruption ran. With Brandon on board, we had an inside man who could confirm everything we'd uncovered. Natalie's article gained traction fast. People who had been afraid to speak out started coming forward with their own horror stories. Photos of unfairly fined properties, stories of harassment, and financial reports Brandon had smuggled out all painted a clear picture. Cynthia Harper and her HOA were corrupt to the core. The backlash was immediate. Community meetings turned into heated debates, and before long, homeowners were demanding a full financial audit. Cynthia tried to do damage control, calling an emergency HOA meeting to clarify misinformation. But when Brandon and I walked in with stacks of evidence and a reporter from the local news station, she turned pale. By the time the night was over, the HOA board had voted to place Cynthia on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Within weeks, legal action followed. As for me, I went back to my land, finally free from the HOA's grip. But I kept one souvenir, a copy of the article that started it all. A reminder that when people stand together, even the most powerful HOA tyrants can fall. From the fake fines to the misuse of funds, the plan was simple. Turn Cynthia Harper's own neighbors against her and watch her empire crumble. The day after Brandon Ellis spilled the beans, Natalie Brooks' article hit the front page of the local paper. The headline read, HOA Overreach, Residents Speak Out Against Unchecked Power. It was a striking piece of small-town journalism, featuring interviews with me, Natalie, Henry Dawson, and Ethan Walker. The article included photos of my half-dismantled fence, Natalie's sabotaged irrigation pipes, and Henry's infamous, unauthorized tool shed. It also exposed the HOA's shady attempts to expand their jurisdiction and hinted at possible financial mismanagement. By noon, the town was buzzing. At the feed store, the diner, and even the post office, people were talking about Cynthia and her clipboard brigade. And the best part? Not a single person was on her side. That afternoon, just as I was getting ready to check on the livestock, my phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, HOA Financial Records, Confidential. I frowned and opened it. Inside was a single sentence. Thought you might find this useful. Attached were dozens of scanned documents, budgets, expense reports, and emails between Cynthia and the other board members. As I scrolled through the files, it became painfully clear just how deep the HOA's corruption ran. There were payments for landscaping services that didn't exist, invoices for security upgrades that had never been installed, and even a suspiciously vague budget allocation labeled Community Development Initiative. And then there were the fines, thousands of dollars collected from properties outside the HOA's jurisdiction, all funneled into a so-called Special Projects Fund. I immediately forwarded the email to Natalie, Henry, and Brandon before calling Natalie. Did you see this? I asked. Oh, I see it, she said, her voice tight with anger. This is a smoking gun if I've ever seen one. The HOA's next monthly meeting was scheduled for Saturday, and the timing couldn't have been better. We spent the rest of the week rallying support. By the time the meeting rolled around, the community center was packed to capacity. Cynthia, dressed in a crisp blazer and clutching her ever-present clipboard, took her place at the front of the room. She smiled her usual fake smile and launched into a speech about community values and maintaining harmony. I let her talk for about 5 minutes before raising my hand. Mr. Reed, she said, her smile faltering just a little. Do you have a question? Oh, I've got more than a question, I said, standing up. I've got concerns about how the HOA is operating, specifically outside its jurisdiction. Her smile froze. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean this. I held up a stack of documents. The HOA's rejection letter from the county, a map showing their actual boundaries, and a few choice excerpts from the financial records. This is proof that the HOA has been illegally fining property owners and using the money for, well, let's call them questionable purposes. The room erupted in murmurs. Cynthia's face turned pale. That's absurd, she said, her voice shaking slightly. The HOA operates with full transparency. Oh, really? Natalie stood up, holding up a copy of the financial records. Because these payments for landscaping and security sure don't look transparent to me. And what about the fines you've been collecting from people who aren't even in the HOA? Care to explain that? Cynthia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Then Brandon stood up, holding a printout of one of Cynthia's emails. This one's my favorite, he said, scanning the room. It's from Cynthia herself, instructing us to find creative ways to encourage compliance from non-HOA members. Sound familiar, Cynthia? The murmurs turned into shouts. People started demanding answers, questioning every decision the HOA had made under Cynthia's leadership. By the end of the meeting, it was clear Cynthia's reign was over. The board voted unanimously to remove her as president, and the county announced an official investigation into the HOA's finances. As for me, I walked out of that meeting with a smile on my face and a promise from the board to pay for my fence repairs. Natalie and Henry got the credit they deserved, and Ethan? Well, he finally got approval for his workshop, free from the HOA's nonsense. And Cynthia Harper? She left the community center with nothing but her clipboard and a town full of people who had finally seen through her lies. Their fines were refunded, Ethan got to keep his fence, and the rest of the community finally got a taste of justice. There's a special kind of silence that falls over a town after something big happens. It's not the usual quiet of early mornings or late nights. It's the hush of people pausing, processing, and figuring out how to move forward. That was the mood in the days following the HOA's public humiliation. Cynthia Harper's name had become a punchline overnight. People were calling her Clipboard Queen at the diner, the hardware store, and just about anywhere else locals gathered to gossip. The story spread like wildfire, fueled by Natalie's article, the disastrous town hall meeting, and a few well-timed Facebook posts. The phrase, "Don't Cynthia me," became shorthand for overstepping your boundaries. But while the town had moved on to mocking Cynthia, I still had unfinished business. A few days after the meeting, I was out by the creek, taking measurements for the bridge repairs when Max's growl alerted me to company. I looked up to see a familiar figure trudging down the hill, Brandon Ellis, the former HOA treasurer. He looked a little worse for wear, his suit rumpled and his tie slightly askew. "Morning, Brandon," I called, leaning on my tape measure. "What brings you out here?" He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I thought you'd want to know what's happening with the investigation." I raised an eyebrow. "And what's the verdict?" Brandon sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's bad. Real bad. Turns out Cynthia wasn't just skimming from the fines. She was funneling money into her personal accounts. The county's found over $50,000 in misappropriated funds so far, and that's just the beginning." I let out a low whistle. "That explains all those special projects." Brandon nodded. "The board's in full-blown damage control mode. They're offering refunds to everyone who was fined illegally, but, well, the HOA is basically broke now. Most of the board members have resigned, and the county's taking over until they can figure out what to do next." I didn't feel an ounce of pity. Good. Maybe they'll think twice before pulling stunts like this again. The HOA, or what was left of it, agreed to cover the cost of my bridge repairs, but I wasn't about to trust them with the job. Instead, I hired a local contractor, an old friend of Henry's who knew his way around a toolbox and wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The day the new planks went down was a satisfying one. Standing there with Max at my side, watching the workers secure the final boards, I felt like I'd reclaimed something that had been taken from me. Not just the bridge, but the principle of it all. "This is what a real community looks like," I said to Max, patting his head. He wagged his tail, clearly agreeing. Word around town was that Cynthia had fled the area shortly after the county announced the investigation. No one knew where she'd gone, but rumors ranged from a wellness retreat to her sister's basement. Henry, ever the optimist, had a theory. She probably holed up in some HOA-free neighborhood where she can't boss anyone around. Natalie laughed at that. If such a place even exists. The fallout from the HOA's collapse had a silver lining. With Cynthia and her clipboard brigade out of the picture, the community started to heal. Neighbors who'd been at odds over fines and petty disputes began working together again. Natalie's irrigation system was fully restored, and Ethan's deer fence stayed exactly where it was. Henry, always ready with a grin and a beer, started hosting informal town hall meetings at his place to make sure the HOA didn't try to rise from the ashes. As for me, I went back to my quiet routine, feeding the chickens, fixing fences, and occasionally sipping coffee by the creek. Life felt normal again, though I kept one eye on the horizon, just in case another clipboard-wielding menace decided to test their luck. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail from the county. It was an official document stating that the HOA's jurisdiction had been permanently reduced to its original boundaries, far, far away from my farm. I framed the letter and hung it in my barn, right next to a picture of the rebuilt bridge. It was a reminder that sometimes standing your ground is all it takes to bring down an empire. And if Cynthia, or anyone like her, ever tried to cross that bridge again, well, let's just say Max and I would be ready. standing up for what's right. The story of Cynthia Harper's downfall serves as a powerful reminder that communities thrive when people stand together against corruption and abuse of power. Many homeowners associations, HOAs, were created to maintain order, but when leadership becomes self-serving, they can quickly turn into oppressive regimes. The key lesson here is knowledge, understanding your rights and questioning authority when something doesn't seem right. Henry Dawson's binder of letters showed how HOAs often rely on intimidation rather than enforceable rules. Brandon Ellis' testimony proved that even those inside the system can recognize its flaws. And the town's collective outrage demonstrated that when people refuse to stay silent, even the most powerful figures can be held accountable. For seniors, this lesson is especially valuable. Many have spent decades building their homes and communities, only to find themselves bullied by overzealous HOA boards. But the truth is, knowledge and unity are the greatest defenses. Speak up, document everything, and don't be afraid to push back. When enough people demand fairness, change becomes inevitable. After all, as Cynthia learned the hard way, no clipboard is powerful enough to silence a town that has found its voice.